Leon Whitfield was 38 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, he believed his marriage was the one thing in his life built to last. He had spent 7 years turning a one-man electrical operation into a 12-person company with his own hands, while his wife Adrienne spent those same years quietly deciding she deserved something better. Leon didn't know that yet. He left for work the same way he always did, coffee in hand, 6:47 in the morning, steady as a foundation he'd poured himself. Then his phone buzzed. A motion alert from the Nanny cam they'd forgotten was still active. He almost ignored it. He almost kept driving. Instead, he pulled into a gas station and opened the app. What he watched in those 4 minutes and 11 seconds didn't just end his marriage. It revealed a plan, methodical, patient, and financially calculated, that had been running beneath his life for over a year. Adrienne thought she knew exactly who she was dealing with. She had never been more wrong. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Leon Whitfield eased his truck out of the driveway at exactly 6:47 a.m., just like he did every Tuesday morning. The familiar weight of his travel mug settled into the cup holder, filled with the coffee he'd brewed at 6:15. His lunch cooler sat behind the seat, packed with the same care he brought to everything else in his life. The quiet Atlanta suburb was still waking up around him, and he welcomed these peaceful moments before the day truly began. At 38, Leon had built something real with his hands and his word. Whitfield & Sons Electric had grown from just him and his tool belt into a 12-person operation that handled commercial and residential jobs across 3 counties. Every step of that growth had come from the same place, showing up early, leaving late, and doing exactly what he said he would do. His crew knew they could call him at 10 at night if something went wrong, and he'd be there. His clients knew that when Leon Whitfield gave you a quote and a timeline, you could take it to the bank. He navigated the morning traffic with practiced ease, his hands knowing the turns before his mind had to think about them. There was satisfaction in that kind of routine, the evidence of a life built on solid ground, piece by piece, day by day. It was the same satisfaction he'd always felt in his marriage to Adrienne. They'd been together 11 years now, married for 9. He'd met her when he was still a journeyman electrician pulling decent wages, before the business, before the house, before any of what they had now. She'd been working events at a downtown hotel, sharp, warm, and funny in a way that made you feel seen, the kind of woman who remembered what you told her and brought it back later in thoughtful ways. They'd fallen in love at exactly the right time, when they were both ready to build something real. The last year and a half had brought changes in Adrienne that Leon noticed but hadn't fully examined. At 36, she wanted more: a bigger house, more travel, entry into social circles that required a particular kind of performance to maintain. He'd chalked it up to the natural restlessness of a woman who'd worked hard her whole life and wanted to see what that work could add to. He hadn't resented it, he'd just worked harder. The nanny cam was such a small detail, he barely thought about it anymore. They'd installed it 2 years ago when they hired a part-time housekeeper, just a simple motion detection camera mounted on a bookshelf in the living room, feeding to an app on his phone. The housekeeper had moved on after 8 months, but neither of them had thought to take the camera down. It had become like any other forgotten piece of furniture, present but unnoticed. Sitting in the slow pulse of traffic on I-20, Leon felt his phone buzz on the passenger seat. Motion alert from the living room camera. He figured it was probably just the cat. That animal had triggered more false alarms than he could count. He reached over and opened the app, expecting to see their orange tabby wandering across the frame. Instead, he saw Adrienne in her robe, moving toward the front door. She checked something, glancing out the window beside the door, and then opened it. A man walked in. He wasn't a repairman. He wasn't a neighbor. He was tall, well-dressed for this hour of the morning, and he moved through the doorway with the easy confidence of someone who had crossed that threshold many times before. He pulled the door shut behind him. Adrienne stepped into his arms. He kissed her on the mouth. Leon watched 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage. Then he locked his phone and stared through the windshield at the car ahead of him. The light had turned green. He didn't move until the car behind him sounded its horn. 2 exits up, he pulled into a gas station. He sat in the parking lot with the engine idling and the coffee going cold in the cup holder. 22 minutes passed. He didn't call Adrienne. He didn't call anyone. He sat perfectly still, doing what he had always done when something went wrong on a job site. He resisted the impulse to act on the first thing he felt, and he waited until he could see the shape of the whole problem. Then he pulled back onto the highway and drove to work. Leon arrived at the job site just as the morning sun was breaking over the horizon. He parked his truck, grabbed his tools, and walked through the familiar motions of starting another workday. His foreman, Curtis, was already there, coffee in hand, going over the day's assignments. "Morning, boss," Curtis said, then paused, studying Leon's face. "You all right? You look a little off." "Didn't sleep well," Leon said, the lie coming easily. "Let's check that south wall conduit run." For the next 4 hours, Leon moved through his responsibilities like a man operating on muscle memory. He checked the electrical panels, signed off on installations, and directed his crew with the same steady authority he always had. But beneath the surface, his mind was running calculations, not voltage or amperage this time, but something far more personal. During his lunch break, Leon sat in his truck and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to his brother Jerome's number and pressed call. Jerome answered on the second ring. Jerome Whitfield was 51, semi-retired after 15 years running his own private investigation firm. His knees and his patience for fieldwork had given out around the same time. He wasn't warm the way Leon was warm, but he was completely reliable. In the Whitfield family, those had always been understood as different expressions of the same devotion. "What's wrong?" Jerome asked, picking up the tension in his brother's silence. Leon didn't tell him what he'd seen. He asked a single question. "If I needed to know everything about a situation, how long would it take you to get it for me?" Jerome was quiet for a moment, weighing the gravity in his brother's voice. Then, "Give me a week. I'll send you what I have tonight." That evening, Leon pulled into his driveway to find lights on and music playing from the kitchen. Adrienne was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like the chicken dish she'd perfected years ago. She looked up when he walked in, her smile bright and genuine, or at least genuine enough that the difference wasn't immediately visible. "How was your day?" she asked, coming over to kiss him hello. Her hand lingered on his arm, the gesture of a woman who loved her husband. Leon felt the touch like a burn. "Busy," he said, managing a tired smile. "That new commercial project is keeping us on our toes." They ate dinner together, and Leon listened to her stories about work, about lunch with friends, about plans for the weekend. He asked small questions, gave appropriate responses, and showed nothing on his face that would tell her anything had changed. After Adrienne fell asleep, Leon sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. The camera app's interface was simple, a rolling 60-day archive of motion-triggered clips. He started at the beginning and worked forward, fast-forwarding through empty rooms and cat wanderings, stopping whenever the motion log showed activity during his work hours. What he found stole his breath in a way the morning's discovery hadn't. That had been a single wound. This was something else entirely. The man, the same man, every time, had been coming on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for at least 9 weeks. The footage showed him arriving within 30 minutes of Leon's departure, staying between 90 minutes and 2 hours, leaving before noon. He moved through Leon's house with the ease of repetition and comfort. He sat in Leon's chair at Leon's kitchen table. He left coffee cups on Leon's counter. In one clip, he answered his phone and walked through the living room while Adrienne finished getting dressed down the hallway, utterly at home in a space that wasn't his. Then Leon found the clip that made his blood run cold. Adrian was on her own phone call, laughing that unguarded laugh she used with people she trusted. She said something Leon couldn't quite make out, and then words that stopped his heart for 3 full beats. He has no idea. He never does. Leon closed the laptop. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, perfectly still. Then he opened a new email and addressed it to Patricia Lamont, the attorney who had handled Whitfield & Sons Electrics Incorporation and who Leon had trusted for 6 years. He typed 3 words, "I need you." He went to bed without saying a word to Adrienne. He lay beside her in the darkness, not sleeping but completely still, because he had already made his first decision. Grief would not set the pace of what happened next. This was his situation now. He would own every move. 4 days after making the call to Jerome, Leon sat alone in his office, the evening sun casting long shadows through the blinds. His crew had gone home for the day, their tools packed away, the job sites quiet. On his desk lay an 11-page report, delivered by Jerome himself just minutes ago. Leon read the first page twice, his eyes moving methodically over each detail. The man from the footage had a name now, Bryce Okafor, 40 years old, a partner track attorney at a mid-size corporate firm in Buckhead. Not a stranger who had wandered into Adrienne's life by chance. He was her college boyfriend from before she transferred schools. Someone with history, someone who had known exactly what he was doing when he re-entered her life. Jerome's investigation was thorough, clinical in its precision. Phone records showed regular calls and texts spanning 14 months. Hotel stays, 3 of them, aligned perfectly with weekends Adrienne had described to Leon as girls' trips. Through a password reset vulnerability, Jerome had accessed a private email account containing correspondence that left no room for doubt about the affair's duration or depth. Leon set down the first section and moved to the next. His hands were steady, but something cold had settled in his chest as the full picture emerged. This wasn't a recent mistake, not a moment of weakness or confusion. This was sustained, deliberate, planned. Then he reached the part that changed everything. 3 months ago, Adrienne had attended a meeting at a financial planning firm in Sandy Springs. Alone. 90 minutes. Jerome had obtained the firm's client intake record through a contact. It listed Adrienne Whitfield and a clear purpose: projected asset valuation and distribution planning, marital estate. She had requested an estimate of Whitfield & Sons Electric's value. She hadn't told Leon about the meeting. She hadn't mentioned it since. Leon set the report down on his desk and looked out at the parking lot, where his truck sat alone under the security light. The pieces locked into place with a clarity that felt like ice water in his veins. This wasn't just an affair. This was an exit strategy. Adrienne wasn't just sleeping with another man. She was building a calculated departure, timing her divorce filing to maximize her claim on the business Leon had built from nothing. She was planning to take half of everything he'd created, everything he'd sacrificed for, and she was doing it with the same careful attention to detail he used on his most complex job sites. Leon gathered the report and drove directly to Patricia Lamont's law office. Patricia was still there, as he'd known she would be. She worked late more often than not. He laid everything on her conference room table: Jerome's report, the footage log, the financial planner record. Patricia went through it carefully, asking precise questions, taking detailed notes. When she finished, she leaned back and outlined exactly what they were facing: how Adrienne would likely characterize the marriage, what arguments her lawyers would make about the business valuation, what tactics they would use to maximize her share. "She'll claim emotional abandonment," Patricia said, tapping her pen against her legal pad. "She'll say you were distant, focused on the business, that she supported you through the lean years and deserves to share in the success. The business valuation will be weaponized to support her position. "What can we do?" Leon asked. Patricia explained the options available within Georgia's equitable distribution framework, legal moves they could make to protect the business, to document the affair's timeline, to establish Adrian's pattern of deception. None of it was simple, but all of it was possible. "How long do we need?" Leon asked, his voice level. 6 to 8 weeks, Patricia said. "To do this correctly." Leon nodded once. "Then that's what we'll take." He drove home in the October dark, his headlights cutting through the familiar streets of his suburb. Adrienne was watching television when he walked in. He sat beside her on the couch, and she tucked her feet under her and leaned against his shoulder, the way she had for years. Leon let her stay there, feeling the weight of her against him, because the plan had already started moving beneath the surface. His grief didn't get to be the loudest thing in the room anymore. He had work to do. Leon's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. the morning after meeting with Patricia. He lay still for a moment, looking at Adrienne's sleeping form beside him, and felt the strange disconnect between what he knew and what he had to show. Then he got up, quiet and practiced, and went to make coffee. The routine was familiar. Measuring grounds, filling the water reservoir, pressing the button. He moved through it mechanically, while his mind mapped out the performance ahead of him. 6 weeks of careful acting. 6 weeks of being the husband she thought she had successfully deceived. When Adrienne came downstairs at 6:15, Leon was at the kitchen table with his second cup, reading work emails on his phone. He looked up and smiled, not too bright, not too forced, exactly the way he would have smiled any other morning before yesterday. "Made enough for you," he said, nodding toward the coffee pot. She poured herself a cup and kissed his cheek as she passed, the gesture so natural it made something in his chest tighten. But he kept his face neutral, asked about her plans for the day, discussed what time he'd be home. That evening, he stopped at the grocery store and bought flowers, yellow daisies, nothing dramatic, the kind of casual thoughtfulness that fit their normal pattern. Adrienne's face lit up when he handed them to her, and he wondered if she felt any dissonance between accepting his gestures and planning her exit. The days began to stack up, each one a careful construction. Leon attended dinner parties with their usual crowd, laughing at the right moments, telling the familiar stories about his crew's adventures on job sites. He suggested a weekend trip to Savannah that they discussed, but never quite managed to schedule. He remembered to pick up the dry cleaning when it was his turn. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, the real work progressed. Patricia moved methodically through the business restructuring, shifting certain operational assets within completely legal parameters that would fundamentally change how the company's value would be calculated in any future proceedings. They weren't hiding assets. They were reorganizing them in ways that would withstand scrutiny, but significantly impact any distribution calculations. Jerome's surveillance continued, precise and thorough. 7 more meetings between Adrienne and Bryce, documented with times, locations, duration. The Tuesday-Thursday pattern held steady, like clockwork, and Leon wondered if they thought the reliability of their schedule made it safer somehow. But it was during the social gatherings that Leon began noticing the deeper layer of Adrienne's strategy. At a dinner party, he overheard her in the kitchen with Sarah Matthews, her voice soft and slightly vulnerable. "It's just, he works so much. Sometimes I feel like I'm living with a stranger." At a weekend barbecue, she sat with Mike and Jennifer Collins, and Leon caught fragments, trying to tell him how I feel, but a pause, a sigh that suggested more than it said. He started tracking which couples received these conversations. The Collinses, the Matthews, the Reeses. Each time, the same careful construction. Adrienne as the loyal wife trying to hold together a marriage to an emotionally distant husband. She was building her narrative foundation, preparing the social ground for the moment she would need sympathy rather than judgment. Leon said nothing. He smiled at the right moments, asked about people's children, discussed business with the husbands. He watched Adrian work the room with the same skill she'd always had, except now he could see the strategy behind every casual comment, every confiding moment. The only people who knew the truth were Jerome, Patricia, and, after a long Sunday afternoon conversation, his mother, Gloria. She had listened without interrupting, her face growing still and hard, but she had followed his lead. She served Adrian dinner that evening as she always had, gave nothing away in her expression. At night, Leon lay awake running numbers through his head. Asset categories, valuation adjustments, legal frameworks that Patricia had explained in detail. The business he'd built from nothing was transforming on paper, not diminishing but reorganizing, becoming something Adrian's carefully timed exit strategy couldn't touch in the way she planned. He wasn't grieving anymore. That space had been filled with purpose, with the precise execution of necessary steps. Every day that Adrian thought she was successfully deceiving him was another day to strengthen his position, to protect what he'd built, to ensure that when everything finally broke open, he would be ready. He was building something new now, not a marriage, but a fortress around everything he'd worked for. And he was building it with the same attention to detail that had made him successful in the first place. The charity gala buzzed with the particular energy of wealthy people feeling generous. Crystal chandeliers caught the light above tables draped in cream-colored linens, while servers in black ties weaved between clusters of evening wear carrying trays of champagne. Leon adjusted his tie. The suit was his own, well-fitted, bought 3 years ago when Whitfield and Sons Electric started landing bigger commercial contracts. He had dressed for those meetings the same way he dressed for this, like a man who knew his worth wasn't determined by anyone else's assessment. His client, Richard Morton, who had invited him and sat on the literacy organization's board, was explaining the evening's schedule when Leon saw Adrienne across the room. She was with Sarah Matthews and Jennifer Collins, so that part hadn't been a lie. But his attention caught on the man standing slightly behind them, holding a whiskey glass, wearing the easy confidence of someone who had never questioned his right to be anywhere. Bryce Okafor. In person, finally, after weeks of surveillance photos and camera footage. Leon turned back to Richard's explanation of the silent auction, his face giving nothing away. He excused himself to get a drink, moving toward the bar with unhurried steps. He could feel Adrienne watching him, probably wondering if he had noticed Bryce yet, probably already rehearsing whatever explanation she would offer if asked. He ordered bourbon, neat. The bartender was just sliding it across when Bryce appeared beside him. "Maker's Mark for me," Bryce said to the bartender, then turned to Leon with a smile that was calculated to put people at ease, while subtly reminding them who held the power in the interaction. "Leon Whitfield, right? I've heard good things about your company." The handshake was firm, professional, wrapped in the particular warmth that partner-track attorneys cultivate. Up close, Bryce looked exactly like his photos, tall, polished, the kind of man who had probably never gotten his hands dirty except at a luxury spa. "Good to meet you," Leon said, his voice neutral, pleasant. He didn't add Bryce's name, didn't indicate whether he knew it or not. Just let the words sit there, unadorned. "The Morton Development Project. That was your crew, wasn't it? Richard speaks very highly of your work." Bryce's tone suggested he was bestowing approval from a position of authority, as if his opinion of Leon's business carried weight. "We do quality work," Leon said simply. He took a sip of his bourbon, then turned slightly back toward where Richard was standing. "If you'll excuse me." The dismissal was subtle but clear. He caught the flicker in Bryce's expression, surprise at being released from the conversation before he had decided it was finished, quickly masked by the assessment that this was simply evidence of Leon's social limitations. Leon moved back to his client, rejoining the discussion about the upcoming phase of the Morton project. He did not look back at Bryce, did not acknowledge Adrienne across the room, did not give either of them anything to read. Later, driving home with Adrienne beside him, she mentioned casually that she had seen him talking to that attorney from the Morrison firm at the bar. Her voice was carefully neutral. "Seemed like a friendly guy," Leon said, matching her tone exactly. 2 days later, sitting in his truck outside the office at 6:30 a.m., Leon opened the text from Jerome. The attached report was thorough, devastating in its precision. 23 withdrawals from their joint savings account spread across 8 months. $475 on March 3rd, $650 on March 17th, $825 on April 2nd, $400 on April 15th. The pattern continued, amounts varying between $350 and $100, dates spaced irregularly to avoid creating a detectable rhythm. Total, $23,400. Jerome had traced the money to a credit union 40 minutes across town, an account in Adrienne's name only, opened 9 months ago. She had been building her escape fund piece by piece while sharing morning coffee with Leon at their kitchen table. Leon read the report twice, his face still. Then he put his phone in his pocket, got out of the truck, and walked to the office door. He unlocked it, turned on the lights, started the coffee maker the same way he did every morning. When the coffee was ready, he poured his cup and called Curtis to run through the day's assignments. His voice was steady, focused. The grief that had been sitting in his chest these past weeks had hardened into something else entirely. Not rage, but pure clarity of purpose. Gloria's house in East Point hadn't changed since Leon was a child. The same low ceiling, the same worn linoleum in the kitchen, the same smell of something always cooking on the stove. He parked his truck behind Jerome's sedan in the narrow driveway and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Inside, Jerome was already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of him. Gloria stood at the counter, pulling a pan of cornbread from the oven. The familiar domestic rhythm of it caught in Leon's chest. How many Sunday afternoons had looked exactly like this, before everything changed? "Sit down," Gloria said, not turning around. "The coffee's fresh." Leon poured himself a cup and settled into his usual chair. Jerome nodded at him, but didn't speak. He had already laid out the folders containing everything they had gathered. Neat stacks of paper that represented 14 months of betrayal reduced to documentation. Gloria set the cornbread on a trivet and took her seat. Her eyes were steady on Leon's face. "Tell me," she said simply. Leon had rehearsed this conversation in his mind, but sitting here in his childhood kitchen, the words felt heavier. He started with the Tuesday morning camera footage, described the man walking through his front door like he belonged there. His voice remained level as he detailed Jerome's investigation. The affair with Bryce spanning 14 months, the hotel stays that matched Adrienne's supposed girls' trips, the private email account full of intimate correspondence. When he reached the financial planner meeting, Adrienne secretly seeking a valuation of his business, Gloria's hands tightened slightly on her coffee cup. But she didn't interrupt. The 23 withdrawals were the hardest part to say out loud. $23,400 total, Leon finished. Hidden in an account across town. She's been building it for 8 months. Silence filled the kitchen. Then Gloria spoke, her voice carrying the particular weight of a mother who had watched her son pour himself into something that was being quietly dismantled from the inside. "And she was sitting in this house at my dinner table the whole time." Leon nodded. Jerome reached for his phone and dialed Patricia's number, putting it on speaker. Patricia's voice was clear and professional as she outlined the legal strategy they had built. The documentation package was comprehensive. Affair evidence, financial records, everything properly logged and witnessed. The hidden account withdrawals constituted dissipation of marital assets under Georgia law, which would allow the court to compensate Leon from Adrienne's share of the settlement. The business restructuring completed over the past weeks, all completely legal, had effectively neutralized the valuation argument Adrienne's attorney would try to make. "The petition is ready to file Friday morning at 9, Patricia continued. The process server will arrive at the house by 9:15. Leon, you'll be documented at your job site. Once the papers are served, all communication from her routes through my office. No direct contact. Gloria listened intently, her face showing nothing but the focused attention she had always given to important matters. There's one more thing, Leon said when Patricia finished. The night before we file, I'm having dinner with her. Jerome looked up sharply. Gloria's eyes narrowed slightly. I need to look her in the eye, Leon continued. Give her one chance to tell me the truth on her own terms. Not because it changes anything, the filing happens regardless. But I need to know if she's capable of honesty when honesty costs her something. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft hum of Gloria's refrigerator. Through the window, late afternoon sun caught the edges of the cornbread pan, still cooling on the counter. Gloria studied her younger son's face, the same face she had watched grow from boy to man, the same quiet strength she had always seen in him. You already know what she's going to do, she said softly. Leon met his mother's eyes. I know, he said. I need to see it anyway. He drove home in the gathering dark, streetlights coming on along the familiar route. The weight of the afternoon's conversation settled around him like a heavy coat, not crushing him, but reminding him with every breath what he was carrying. Leon stood at his kitchen counter, methodically peeling shrimp as steam rose from the pot of grits simmering on the stove. His movements were practiced, efficient, the same way he approached every task that mattered. The andouille sausage was already sliced, waiting to be added to the sauce he'd started. A bottle of Adrienne's favorite Chardonnay breathed on the counter. The familiar rhythm of cooking settled over him. This dish had been Adrienne's favorite since their third date, when he'd first made it for her in his old apartment's tiny kitchen. She'd sat on his counter then, legs swinging, watching him cook with genuine fascination. Where did you learn to cook like this? She'd asked, and he'd told her about Gloria teaching him and Jerome when they were boys, insisting her sons would never depend on anyone else to feed them properly. Now, 11 years later, Leon moved through the same motions in a different kitchen. The house was quiet, except for the soft bubbling of the grits and the steady tap of his knife against the cutting board. He'd set the table properly. The good plates, wine glasses, cloth napkins. The evening light slanted through the windows, catching the edges of the wine bottle's label. At 6:23, he heard Adrienne's key in the front door. The familiar sound of her heels on the hardwood, her bag dropping onto the entryway table. She appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped, taking in the scene. Her husband at the stove, the set table, the wine waiting. "What's all this?" she asked, genuine pleasure in her voice. She kicked off her shoes and crossed the kitchen, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her face between his shoulder blades. The gesture was so familiar, so seemingly authentic, that for a moment Leon felt the weight of 11 years pressing against his ribs. "Felt like cooking," he said, his voice steady. "Sit down. It's almost ready." She poured herself wine and settled at the table, talking about her day, a client who couldn't make up his mind, a lunch meeting that ran long, a funny thing that happened with the office printer. Leon listened as he plated the food, noting how easily she filled the space between them with comfortable conversation. Her laugh was real, her gestures natural. She had lived inside this marriage so long that performing it had become indistinguishable from inhabiting it. They ate. The food was good. He had not allowed his knowledge of what was coming to affect his cooking. Adrienne made appreciative sounds, took second helpings. She mentioned a holiday trip she'd been looking at, somewhere warm for Christmas, maybe. Just the two of them. Leon waited for a natural pause in her conversation. Then, keeping his voice exactly as it had been all evening, he asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me? About us? About how things have been for you?" Something flickered behind Adrienne's eyes, quick, almost imperceptible, like a light switching off in a distant room. Then it was gone, replaced by the warm, open expression she wore when she wanted him to feel seen. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "You know what?" she said softly. "I was thinking today about how grateful I am. For you, for this life we've built. I know I don't say enough how much I appreciate how hard you work, how steady you are." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm happy, Leon. Really happy." She said everything in her considerable arsenal except the one thing that would have mattered. Every word was perfectly chosen, precisely delivered. She had always been gifted at that, knowing exactly what to say, how to say it, when to deploy it. Leon nodded. He refilled her wine glass. "Tell me more about this holiday trip you're thinking about." They finished dinner. They watched television on the couch. Adrienne fell asleep against his shoulder before 10, the way she had countless other nights. Leon waited until her breathing was deep and regular before carefully extracting himself. He went out to his truck and sat in the dark driveway. The neighborhood was quiet around him, streetlights casting long shadows across lawns. He wasn't crying. That door had closed weeks ago, sealed by 23 withdrawals and 14 months of calculated deception. When the cold started seeping through the windows, he went back inside. He did not return to their bedroom. He took a blanket from the hall closet and settled on the couch, setting his alarm for his usual early hour. At 6:47 the next morning, Leon pulled out of the driveway. He did not look back at the house. In truth, he had already left it. Leon pulled his truck into the Decatur construction site at 7:15, the same time he arrived every morning. The half-finished commercial kitchen gleamed under temporary work lights, conduit exposed along partially framed walls. Curtis was already there with two of the newer crew members going over the day's assignments. "Morning, boss," Curtis called out, clipboard in hand. Leon nodded, shrugging into his work vest. The familiar rhythm of the job site settled around him, the steady thrum of generators, the metallic clang of tools being unpacked, the easy banter of his crew. He moved through his normal routine, checking the previous day's work, signing off on material deliveries, answering questions about the conduit layout. At 9:03, while Leon was examining a junction box installation, his phone vibrated briefly in his pocket. Patricia's filing had gone through. He kept working. 14 minutes later, across town, a process server was ringing the doorbell of the house on Briarcliff Way. Leon didn't need to see it to know exactly how it would play out. Adrienne answering in her robe, because it was Friday, and she wasn't expecting anyone for at least another hour. The papers being placed in her hands, the server leaving before she finished reading the cover page. At 9:22, Leon's phone buzzed against his hip. He took it out, glanced at the screen. The text from Adrienne read, "What is this? Call me." He read it once, turned the phone face down, and went back to discussing the electrical panel placement with Curtis. "We need to shift this 3 inches to the left," he said, marking the spot with his pencil. "Code requires more clearance here." His phone vibrated 4 more times in rapid succession. He felt each buzz against his leg but didn't reach for it. At 9:44, it rang. Adrienne's number. He let it go to voicemail. At 10:02, another call. Unknown number this time, probably the first attorney she'd managed to reach for a consultation. He didn't answer that one either. Instead, he sent a single text to Patricia. "She's been served." Patricia's response came immediately. "Handled. You won't hear from her directly again." Leon spent the next 2 hours working steadily through his morning checklist, approving material orders, coordinating with the general contractor about schedule changes, walking the site with his crew leads to ensure every installation met his standards. His phone stayed in his pocket, silent now that Patricia's office was intercepting all incoming calls from Adrienne's numbers. At noon, he drove to a diner on Metropolitan Parkway. Jerome and Gloria were already in their usual booth. Coffee ordered, menus on the table, and a slice of peach pie in front of Gloria that she'd started without waiting. "They changed the recipe," Gloria announced as Leon slid into the booth. New owner thinks adding nutmeg improves it. He's wrong. The coffee's better, though, Jerome offered, pushing a mug toward Leon. They ordered. Club sandwich for Jerome, patty melt for Leon. Gloria worked on her pie and told them about Leon's nephew Danny finally deciding on Georgia Tech for engineering. Like his uncle, she said, glancing at Leon with quiet pride. Curtis set a date for the wedding, Leon mentioned between bites. Early April. Asked me to be there. Good man, Curtis, Jerome nodded. Been with you, what, 4 years now? Going on 5, Leon corrected. Helped me wire that whole medical complex on Ponce. They discussed the diner's new ownership. Jerome insisted the home fries had improved. Gloria maintained nothing was as good as it used to be. Leon stayed neutral and finished his sandwich. The conversation moved easily around the empty space where Adrienne's name might have been. There was nothing left to say about her that mattered. When the check came, Gloria insisted on paying. Mother's privilege, she said firmly, the way she'd been saying it since Leon and Jerome were boys. Back at the job site, Leon's crew was already returning from their own lunch break. Curtis had the afternoon schedule mapped out. Panel installations on the east wall. Conduit runs to finish on the north side. Leon moved through the familiar motions of his trade, checking connections, verifying measurements, teaching the newer crew members the particular way he wanted things done. The afternoon proceeded without incident, marked only by the steady progress of work being done properly by men who knew their business. By 4 o'clock, they were ahead of schedule on the panel installation. Leon signed off on the day's progress reports and watched his crew pack up, exchanging casual goodbyes and plans for the weekend. The conference room in Patricia's office offered a stark view of Peachtree Street through floor-to-ceiling windows. Morning traffic flowed 20 stories below, cars catching glints of October sun. Leon sat beside Patricia, a closed manila folder centered precisely on the polished table in front of her. His work clothes felt out of place against the leather chair. But he had come straight from a job site, and he wasn't interested in changing for this. At exactly 10 o'clock, Patricia's assistant opened the door. Adrienne walked in first, wearing a cream-colored blazer that Leon recognized, something she'd bought for a charity board meeting 3 months ago. Her attorney, Sarah Gaines, followed with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Both women moved with the particular careful dignity of people who had rehearsed their entrance. Adrienne's eyes met Leon's for a fraction of a second before sliding away. Her makeup was immaculate but couldn't quite hide the shadows beneath her eyes. She had been crying recently. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Gaines began, setting her portfolio on the table. "We believe there's room for productive discussion before—" Patricia opened the folder. What followed was not a negotiation. It was not even truly a conversation. It was Patricia Lamont doing what Patricia Lamont did best, presenting documented fact in the same flat, procedural tone she used for everything. Because the material required no dramatic flourish to land with devastating effect. "We'll begin with Exhibit A," Patricia said, sliding the first page across the table. Security camera footage from the residence, covering a 60-day period. We've provided a timeline marking specific dates and durations of Mr. Okafor's visits. You'll note the pattern: Tuesday and Thursday mornings, arriving consistently within 30 minutes of Mr. Whitfield's departure for work, staying between 90 minutes and 2 hours. Gaines began writing rapidly in her portfolio. Adrienne's hands remained perfectly still in her lap. Exhibit B contains phone records documenting contact between Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Okafor, spanning 14 months. Exhibit C provides hotel receipts corresponding to 3 weekends Mrs. Whitfield described to Mr. Whitfield as girls' trips. Exhibit D is a transcript of emails from a private account registered to Mrs. Whitfield. Patricia continued methodically through the evidence. Her voice never rose. Her pace never quickened. She simply laid out fact after fact, page after page, building a wall of documentation that sealed off every possible avenue of denial or reinterpretation. When she reached the financial section, Adrian's composure flickered for the first time. On July 12th, Mrs. Whitfield attended a 90-minute consultation with Riverside Financial Planning in Sandy Springs. The stated purpose, as recorded in their client intake form, was projected asset valuation and distribution planning, marital estate. Specifically, Mrs. Whitfield requested an estimate of Whitfield & Sons Electric's market value. Mr. Fuster, Whitfield was not informed of this meeting. Gaines leaned in to whisper something in Adrienne's ear. Adrienne shook her head once, sharply. Finally, Patricia continued, we have documented 23 withdrawals from the joint savings account over an 8-month period, totaling $23,400. The amounts were deliberately irregular to avoid pattern detection. The funds were transferred to an account opened by Mrs. Whitfield at Prairie Credit Union, an institution with which she had no prior relationship. The silence that followed felt physical. Traffic continued moving 20 stories below. The conference room's climate control hummed quietly. Adrienne stared at the table, her jaw set. Her hands remained still in her lap, the particular stillness of someone exerting significant control. Gaines wrote another note in her portfolio, then touched Adrienne's arm gently. Finally, Adrienne looked up. For the first time since entering the room, she met Leon's eyes directly. What passed between them in that moment was not the love they had built over 11 years, and not the cold strategy of the past 14 months, but something else entirely. The expression of a person who had just understood, completely and too late, that they had been operating on a false assumption about who they were dealing with. Leon spoke once. He had chosen his words carefully, and he delivered them in the same tone he used when telling a client what it would cost to fix something that should never have been allowed to deteriorate so far. You decided I was somebody you could afford to underestimate. I just needed you to understand that was the only mistake that mattered. He buttoned his jacket. He stood. He walked out of the conference room, down the hallway lined with law firm artwork, through the glass doors onto Peachtree Street, where the October air was crisp and bright. For a moment, he stood on the sidewalk, feeling the particular lightness that comes with setting down something extraordinarily heavy. Then he walked to his truck and drove back to work. The Depot Diner on Flat Shoals hadn't changed its coffee in 20 years, and that was exactly why Leon chose it. Old places held their shape. They didn't pretend to be anything they weren't. He arrived at 6:45 a.m., ordered coffee black, and set a manila folder beside his left hand. His Whitfield & Sons work shirt still had yesterday's drywall dust on one sleeve. He hadn't changed for this meeting. He wasn't going to. Bryce Okafor walked in at 7:07, precisely 7 minutes late, the kind of delay meant to establish dominance without being openly rude. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Leon's first work truck. His smile was the practiced expression of a man who had spent years perfecting the exact degree of condescension that would land without quite being actionable. "Interesting choice of venue," Bryce said, sliding into the booth. He didn't order coffee. "I'm not here to threaten you," Leon said. "And I'm not here to argue. I want to say one thing to your face, and then I want to give you something. After that, you can do whatever you want with your morning." Bryce leaned back, shoulders easy against the vinyl. "I'm listening." "You knew she was married. You knew about me specifically. She told you about me. I know that, because you came and shook my hand at that gala, and looked me in the eye and lied without flinching. So I don't have any interest in pretending you were some innocent party who got swept up in something. You made choices. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, every hotel room. You made a choice." Bryce's mouth opened. Leon held up one finger. Not aggressive. Just, "I'm not finished. I'm not asking for an apology. I don't need anything from you emotionally. What I am telling you is that a man who will walk into another man's house and sit in his chair. Leon paused just long enough for Bryce to feel the weight of knowing that detail. Is a man who has decided the rules don't apply to him. And in my experience, men who believe that tend to have built their entire lives on other people not looking closely. Leon slid the manila folder across the table. Bryce looked at it, but didn't open it. Go ahead, Leon said. The first 3 pages were printed email exchanges between Bryce and a junior associate at his firm, Danielle Osei. In them, Bryce had pressured her to falsify billing records on 2 client accounts. When she refused, he had threatened her career. Danielle had kept every email. She had also, it turned out, kept a recorded phone call. Jerome hadn't gone looking for this. Danielle had reached out after seeing his old PI firm referenced in a legal forum, where someone mentioned Jerome's work on professional misconduct cases. She had been holding the evidence for 2 years, afraid and uncertain, waiting for the right moment and the right context to come forward. The remaining pages were a formal complaint addressed to the Georgia State Bar's Office of General Counsel. 2 signatures at the bottom, Danielle Osei and Leon Whitfield as corroborating witness. Bryce's expression didn't collapse all at once. It degraded slowly, like a structure losing load-bearing supports, one at a time. The complaint was filed this morning at 8 o'clock, Leon said. I'm not telling you that to hurt you. I'm telling you so you understand the timeline. It is already done. Danielle filed it because she decided she was tired of carrying it alone. I co-signed because what you did to her and what you helped do to my marriage come from the same place in you, the part that believes other people exist for your convenience. You have no idea what you've just... Bryce's attorney voice came back, thinner than before. I know exactly what I've done, Leon said. And so does your managing partner. He received a courtesy copy at 7:45. The silence at the diner table was absolute. A waitress refilled Leon's coffee. He didn't drink it. I don't hate you, he said, and meant it. I don't have room for that. But I want you to understand something before I walk out this door. You looked at me in that tuxedo, and you saw a man you didn't have to take seriously. That's the only reason any of this went the way it did for as long as it did. I just needed you to know that the man you dismissed is the same man who ended your career on a Tuesday morning before he went to work. Leon left exact change on the table. He walked out, leaving Bryce alone with his 12-page folder and the weight of what was already in motion. 8 months passed like water. The divorce finalized in June, handled through paperwork. Adrienne's settlement reflected the documented asset dissipation. The 23,400 $400 in unauthorized withdrawals factored explicitly in the court's calculation. She received a fraction of what her financial planner had projected. Bryce resigned from his firm by mutual agreement in December, 8 days before the State Bar completed its preliminary review. He retained separate counsel and stopped returning Adrienne's calls. Leon sold the house in July. He bought a smaller one 12 minutes from his mother. 4 rooms, good yard, garage big enough for a proper office. He painted the living room himself on a Saturday afternoon. Windows open, music on. Whitfield and Sons Electric hired 2 new crew members in August, bringing the total to 14. In September, Leon signed a lease on a small commercial space in Marietta, the second office, the expansion he had been quietly planning for months. The social circle Adrienne had cultivated remained almost entirely loyal to Leon. They had known him longer, had always known him as the one who showed up, who followed through, who remembered what you told him. She had misread the room she thought she'd spent years working. On a Tuesday morning in October, Leon pulled out of his new driveway. Coffee in the cup holder, tools in the truck bed. His phone buzzed. Motion alert from the new house camera. He glanced at the screen. The cat walked across the living room. Leon smiled, set the phone face down, and drove to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.